The smell of burning paper hit my kitchen even before I saw what was left of my passport. Still warm ashes spread over the marble counter that Jack was so proud of. My fingers trembled as I touched the charred remains of my official photo, my eyes staring back at me among singed edges. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Sorry for the inconvenience, but I had to cancel your trip to Florence. Jack's voice sounded casual, as if he were just commenting on the weather. He leaned against the door frame, watching my reaction with that look I knew all too well, a mix of superiority and fake concern. An emergency came up at work. I need to use the miles for a business trip. I figured you'd understand. 12 years of marriage had taught me enough to recognize the lie in his tone. My voice came out surprisingly firm. You burned my passport! You're overreacting as usual, Melissa. It was an accident. We can get another one when it's really needed. At that moment, something inside me just broke. It wasn't just about the passport or the trip to Florence I had been planning for 3 years. It was about all the small freedoms Jack had stolen from me, one by one. So gradually that I barely noticed until there was almost nothing left. I waited until he left for dinner with his colleagues and automatically started cleaning up the ashes. Then I stopped. For the first time in years, I really paused. I left his mess untouched and went straight to my home office. On Jack's second phone, the one he thought I didn't even know existed, I found the messages. Amanda. Photos of Florence. Reservations for 2 at the same hotel I had dreamed of staying in. The trip he denied me, planned down to every last detail with another woman. I didn't cry. Instead, I acted. In 20 minutes, I gathered my important documents and transferred half of our savings to my personal account, the account he insisted I keep for emergencies. I grabbed only the essentials. A small suitcase was enough to carry what truly mattered from the life I had built with him. I drove to Heather's place, the wife of Jack's business partner. We'd never been close. Jack always discouraged those kinds of friendships. But something told me she would understand. Melissa, what happened? Heather asked, surprised to see me at her door at 10 in the evening. Jack burned my passport to go to Florence with another woman. I need a place to stay tonight. Her expression changed from surprise to immediate understanding. Come in, stay as long as you need. In Heather's guest room, I opened my purse and pulled out the one personal item I had insisted on bringing, my old sketchbook. I sat on the edge of the bed and started drawing for the first time in years. My lines were hesitant at first, but soon my hand remembered the motion. I drew ruins, fragmented landscapes, and finally, a bird rising from ashes. The next morning, Jack called dozens of times. When I finally answered, his voice alternated between pleading and threatening. Come back home immediately, don't be ridiculous. I'm not coming back, Jack. Where would you live without me, without my money? Be realistic. I transferred half of our savings. It's fair. The silence on the other end gave me a satisfaction I had never experienced before. 3 days later, he found me at Heather's. I don't know how, but there he was, standing in the living room with that rehearsed smile. Let's talk like adults, dear. We have nothing to talk about. You're being irrational. It was just a passport. I showed him the photos of Amanda I'd found on his phone. His face changed instantly. You hacked my phone. That's illegal. Burning my passport is illegal too. That's when the doorbell rang. Heather answered, and to our surprise, it was Amanda. But she wasn't at all what I had imagined. I'm Amanda Reynolds, federal financial investigator, she said, showing her badge. And we need to talk about Jack Sullivan and his $40 million Ponzi scheme. The world under my feet crumbled for the second time in a week, as Amanda explained how Jack had misappropriated millions from investors and planned to flee the country. I realized I didn't truly know the man I had spent 12 years with. 2 days later, I watched Jack's arrest on TV. Reporters swarmed around our house while federal agents removed boxes and computers. My name kept coming up in the news as the wife who might have uncovered the scheme. The truth was much simpler and more painful. I hadn't discovered anything because I was too busy being exactly who Jack wanted me to be. The phone call from Barbara caught me completely by surprise. Jack's mother always treated me with a distant politeness, But she never hid her preference for more ambitious daughters-in-law for her son. Now her voice sounded unrecognizable over the phone, fragile, almost pleading. "Melissa, I know I have no right to ask, but I need to see you." I hesitated. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of depositions, lawyers, and reporters camped outside Heather's. The last person I wanted to see was someone from the Sullivan family. "Please, I'm not defending Jack. I need to tell you some things." I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe, away from prying eyes. When I arrived, Barbara was already there, a shrunken version of the imposing matriarch I once knew. Her eyes were puffy from all the crying. "I always knew," she began as soon as I sat down. "Not about the financial crimes that shocked me as much as anyone, but about how he treated you." I felt my body stiffen. It was hard to hear that spoken by someone else. Jack learned from his father. The same control, the same, possessiveness. I never interfered, never questioned it. I thought that's just how marriages worked. Her trembling hand reached for mine. And worse, I encouraged it. Every time I suggested you should focus more on the home, ditch those art dreams, I was reinforcing exactly what he was doing to you. The coffee between us went cold as Barbara continued her confession, as she realized, too late, that the pattern was repeating itself. She regretted every comment that had diminished my dreams to please her son. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Melissa. I just wanted you to know that I understand what you went through, and I'm ashamed of my part in it." Before we parted, Barbara handed me an envelope. "The keys to the lake house. It's in my name, so the feds can't touch it. Use it as long as you need. It's the least I can do." That night, alone in Heather's guest room, I opened my sketchbook and drew Barbara, not the intimidating woman I'd known for years, but the broken figure from the cafe. When I finished, I realized I was crying. Not for Jack or the lost marriage, but for all of us. Women who, in different ways, got trapped in cages we didn't always even recognize. The lake house offered the isolation I needed. Far from the media and sympathetic glances, I set up a simple routine. I woke up early, walked along the shore, and drew for hours on end. The savings I had rescued would give me a few months of peace to decide on my next move. It was Jessica, my sister, who suggested the idea during one of our recently resumed weekly calls. "Why don't you go to Florence now? Nothing's stopping you." "I don't have a passport, remember?" "Then get another. What Jack burned was a document, Mel, not your right to go." I filled out the form that same afternoon. When the new passport arrived 3 weeks later, I stared at my official photo, the same serious expression, but different eyes. Eyes that knew more. The flight to Florence was as scary as it was liberating. Sitting alone by the window, I watched the clouds and thought about all the trips I never took, because Jack had better plans, more opportune moments, higher priorities. Florence welcomed me with the warm embrace of a late summer day. My little rented apartment sat in an old building just a few blocks from the Uffizi Gallery. On my first day, I walked aimlessly, letting myself get lost in the narrow alleys, soaking up the sounds of a language I had secretly studied over the years, always knowing that one day I would be here. On the second morning, I woke up with an almost feverish determination. I visited the Uffizi like I had dreamed so many times. I stood in front of Botticelli's Burst of Venus and just let the tears fall. An elderly couple nearby offered me a handkerchief, asking in broken English if I was okay. "I'm fine," I answered hesitantly in Italian. Sometimes beauty hits us in unexpected ways. In the following days, I set up a routine. Mornings at museums, afternoons drawing in squares, evenings walking along the illuminated bridges over the Arno River. I started filling whole notebooks with sketches, architectural details, people in cafes, the changing light over the centuries-old buildings. It was on one of those drawing days in the Boboli Gardens that I met Sarah, an American like me, in her 50s, with short gray hair and contagious energy. She stopped to compliment my sketch of a partially damaged statue. "You captured exactly what makes this piece special," she said, pointing to the lines in my notebook. "Its beauty isn't in perfection, but in how it survived over time while keeping its essence." I found out that Sarah was an art restoration professor at the local university. When I mentioned my previous studies in art history and my brief experience in restoration before marriage, her eyes lit up. "We're always looking for talent for our program. Why don't you visit the department tomorrow? I have a project that might interest you." I hesitated, thinking about my vague plans to return to the US in a few weeks. "Even if it's just to see what we do," she insisted. "Sometimes the universe puts opportunities on our path exactly when we need them." The restoration department occupied a historic building that had been updated with modern technology. Sarah introduced me to the labs where students were meticulously working on canvases, sculptures, and damaged frescoes. "This is our current project," she explained, showing a small Renaissance painting with extensive decay. A 15th century Madonna and Child, recently discovered in an attic. Years of neglect nearly destroyed it, but we can still restore it. I instinctively leaned closer, analyzing the damage. The layer of oxidized varnish is hiding important details. "And look here," I pointed to a darkened section. "There's a secondary figure that's barely noticeable." Sarah smiled. "Exactly what I thought. You have a good eye." I spent the whole afternoon watching the technicians, asking questions, and getting familiar with equipment that didn't exist when I studied restoration. Just as I was about to leave, Sarah handed me an envelope. "It's an application for our Art Restoration Scholarship. The program lasts 2 years and includes housing and a modest stipend. Think about it." I went back to my apartment in a state of shock. The opportunity seemed surreal, studying what I'd always loved in one of the cradles of world art. But the doubt lingered. Did I deserve this? Could I really start over at 40? That night I dreamed of the damaged painting from the lab. In the dream, I peeled away layer after layer of dirt, revealing vibrant colors and forgotten details. I woke up with an absolute certainty about what I needed to do. I worked on the scholarship proposal for an entire week. I dusted off long-forgotten knowledge, researched current techniques, and drafted a detailed plan for restoring the Madonna. I handed the document to Sarah with trembling hands. "It's going to work," she said confidently. "I rarely see someone with your mix of technical talent and artistic sensitivity." 3 weeks later, I received the notification. The scholarship was mine. I celebrated alone at a small winery on the outskirts of the city. While savoring a local Chianti, I wrote to Jessica and Heather, sharing the news. Then hesitantly, I sent a message to Barbara. "I'll be in Florence for 2 years. Thank you for helping me find my way." Her reply came instantly. "The lake house will be waiting when and if you ever want to come back. But something tells me you found your true home." That night, back at my apartment, I picked up my sketchbook and drew an idealized version of the damaged Madonna. Not as it originally was, perfect and untouched, but as it would look after restoration, beautiful and authentic, with every mark of its history preserved as an essential part of its identity. That's when I realized that I wasn't just restoring art. I was restoring myself with the same meticulous patience, the same respect for scars, and the same belief in the beauty that endures despite time and damage. The letter came on official letterhead from the federal penitentiary system. I recognized Jack's impeccable handwriting immediately, even before I opened the envelope. I was just starting my 4th month in Florence, fully immersed in the restoration program, when his lawyer finally got my address. "We need to talk. I have visitation rights. Come in." No apologies, no questions about how I was doing. Even behind bars, Jack still thought he could boss me around. I tossed the letter in a drawer and went on with my day, determined not to let him intrude on my new life. But at night, lying on the small bed in my Florentine apartment, that letter weighed on my mind. Not because I missed him or regretted leaving him, but because of the feeling that one chapter was still unfinished. During the restoration techniques class the next day, as I was learning to carefully remove layers of darkened varnish from a small 17th century canvas, Sarah noticed to my distraction. "The secret of restoration is not only removing what damages the work," she explained while adjusting my hand on the tool, "but knowing when to stop, so you don't eliminate what gives the piece its character." Her words resonated beyond artistic technique. That night I booked a ticket to New York. You don't have to do that, Heather insisted when I told her about my plans. Our friendship had deepened over the months, with weekly calls where we shared our rebuilt lives. I'm not going because of him, I explained. I'm going for me. I need to close this chapter of my history to really move on. The federal prison was a gray, impersonal complex on the outskirts of the city. I passed through security with a calm that surprised even me. The officer led me to a visitation room where other inmates were talking with family. Jack was already seated at the designated table, wearing that khaki uniform that looked absurdly ordinary for someone who had always been proud of his Italian suits. When he saw me, his face lit up with that calculated smile I once mistook for love. "You came," he said, as if my presence confirmed something he always knew. "I knew you'd come back." I sat in silence, studying the man before me. Physically, he was the same Jack. Neat, gray hair, upright posture, alert eyes. But something fundamental had changed. Or maybe I suddenly realized the change was in me, how clearly I now saw him. "I have a strategy," he started without preamble. "My lawyers are working on a deal. If you testify that you knew nothing about the business, it will strengthen my case that there was never any intent to commit fraud, just investments that went wrong." "I didn't come here to discuss your defense," I interrupted calmly. "Then why did you come?" His familiar irritation began to show in his voice. "To see you one last time, to close things off." "Close things off?" He laughed incredulously. "We've been married for 12 years, Melissa. You don't close something like a lease." "I already have," I replied, surprising both of us with my firmness. "The divorce papers have been with your lawyer since last week." Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice into that persuasive tone he had used so often to make me give up my dreams, ambitions, and friendships. "I know you're hurt about the passport incident. It was a mistake, I admit. But everyone makes mistakes, Melissa. What we had was bigger than that. It's not about the passport, Jack. It never was. It's about the 12 years in which you systematically broke every piece of my spirit, isolated me from everyone I loved, and convinced me that I couldn't breathe without your permission. That's ridiculous. I gave you a life millions of women would envy. A gilded cage is still a cage." His face hardened, the mask of reasonability slipping to reveal the controlled anger that had always simmered just beneath the surface. "So that's it? You're really just going to abandon me when I'm at rock bottom? After everything I did for you?" "I'm moving on, Jack. There's a difference." "With whom?" he demanded, narrowing his eyes. "Who's behind this sudden independence?" That's when I realized he really couldn't fathom that I might make my own choices. In his mind, if I wasn't under his control, I must be under someone else's. "I'm in Florence," I finally revealed. "I got an art restoration scholarship." The surprise on his face was worth the entire trip. "Florence? But how? How long have you been there?" "Long enough to know this is where I belong." "That's crazy. You don't speak Italian. You don't know anyone there. How can you even think about building a life on your own in a foreign country?" "I'm not alone. I have colleagues, friends, and a purpose that's truly my own." Jack shook his head, his expression swinging between disbelief and disdain. "This is just a phase. When the novelty wears off and reality sets in, you'll realize just how much you need me. I've lived without you for almost 5 months, Jack. Every day has been better than the last." I saw something break in his eyes. Not sadness at the loss, but anger at losing control. That's when I finally understood. He never loved me, only the idea of owning me. "I have to go," I announced, standing up. "My flight to Florence leaves early tomorrow." "You're going to regret this," he said, that voice which once paralyzed me with fear. "When all the money's gone and your little Italian dream crumbles, don't come crawling back." I smiled, not out of cruelty, but from a sudden clarity. "That's the difference between us now, Jack. I'd rather fail at something I love than succeed at a life I hate." I left without looking back, feeling the weight of 12 years fall from my shoulders with every step away from him. The Santa Croce Cafe quickly became my favorite refuge in Florence. From my usual table, I could see the majestic facade of the basilica as I worked on my sketches or studied restoration techniques. It was there that I decided to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of my departure. I ordered a cappuccino and a cannoli, a little indulgence to mark the occasion. The late afternoon sun bathed the square in golden hues, turning both tourists and locals into almost mythical figures. I opened my new sketchbook, the 5th one since I arrived in Florence, and began to sketch the scene in front of me. My hand moved with a confidence I hadn't known before, capturing details and textures with a precision that still amazed me. Next to me, a folder rested carrying my latest project, the full restoration of a small 15th century panel, entrusted to me as the final part of my studies. Sarah had praised my work the week before, saying I had hands that understand the language of time. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up and smiled at Elena, my 70-year-old Italian neighbor who had gradually become my informal teacher of language and local culture. "Sure, please do." Elena gracefully sat down and ordered her usual espresso. Her eyes scanned my drawing with approval. "Every time better, Melissa. Soon you'll be selling your own work, not just restoring others." "One step at a time," I replied in Italian, which now flowed much more naturally. "Today I'm just celebrating." "Ah, yes, your anniversary of freedom, as you call it. A whole year here in our Florence." I nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for everything that had happened over these 12 months. The restoration program had proven more rewarding than I had ever imagined. My rented apartment now really felt like home, decorated with little treasures from flea markets and gifts from new friends. Jessica had visited me for 2 weeks that summer, and our relationship was rekindling like the years of forced separation by Jack had never even existed. And to my surprise, Barbara kept in regular touch, her emails evolving from cautious apologies to genuine exchanges about art and travel. "I got an offer to stay on after the scholarship ends," I revealed to Elena. "The university wants me to join the museum team as an assistant restorer." "Wonderful. Then Florence won't have to say goodbye to you so soon." "Seems not," I agreed, feeling the certainty of that decision solidify inside me. As we talked, I noticed a young woman at the next table, clearly American, struggling with a city map as she tried to find her way. Her face showed that mix of frustration and awe I immediately recognized, the look of someone both lost and at the same time finding her way. "Excuse me," I gently interjected in English. "Can I help you find somewhere?" The relief on her face was instant. "Oh yes, please. I'm trying to get to the Uffizi Gallery, but I think I'm completely lost." "Actually, it's not far from here," I explained, turning her map in the right direction and tracing the route with my finger. "Follow this street, turn right on Borgo dei Greci, and you'll see the sign soon." "Thank you. I'm here alone and a bit overwhelmed with everything." "Is this your first time in Florence?" She nodded. "I've always dreamed of coming." I finally found the courage. Something in her, maybe that hesitant determination in her eyes, resonated with me. "It's worth every moment," I assured her. "And if you need suggestions for less touristy places to check out, I'll be here tomorrow around the same time." After she left, Elena looked at me with a knowing smile. "The circle is complete, isn't it? You helping someone else find their way." "I guess so. That's how we know we're really healed, when we can extend a hand to others without reopening our own wounds." I returned to my sketch, adding details to the basilica's facade. Under my fingertips, the cracks and scars of the centuries-old building transformed from imperfections to essential elements of its beauty and history, just like my own scars, I thought. They didn't need to be hidden or erased. They just had to be woven into this new image I was creating of myself, brushstroke by brushstroke, day after day. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. The sun began to set over Florence, casting long shadows across the square. Soon the city lights would come on, revealing another kind of beauty. I closed my sketchbook, savored the last sip of my cappuccino, and knew without a doubt, out of the ashes of what was destroyed, something new and authentic had been reborn. I didn't just survive, I flourished.